Pavilion, and this is the first seminar at this stage, at this Nordic Council arranged event, which is also organized by Uppsala University in the Climate Change Leadership Initiative, which I'm a senior researcher there. My name is Daniel Lindvall, and I will try to moderate this discussion about Nordic climate leadership, and we're going to analyze the question: is the Nordic countries frontrunners on climate change policies, road models that the rest of the world could look at to get inspiration and to move ahead with that kind of good examples? Or are there actually things that they are the side effects of the Nordic policies? And here to discuss this issue, we have representatives from Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, and I'll present them in order as the discussion goes along. But I will first of all like to invite Mikael Karlsson, who's Associate Professor at Uppsala University Climate Change Leadership, and he will give a short introductory speech about the Nordic climate policies and how the different Nordic countries what kind of success they have made on these issues. So welcome up, Mikael. And Mikael will also end up this discussion about wrapping up and rounding up and giving some summary. So please, Mikael, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Well, one question that we are asking ourselves today is whether or not there is something unique in the Nordic countries in terms of climate policies, policy on mitigation. It's often stated that Nordic countries are forerunners in environmental policy. And if we look back on a national basis, we indeed see very early national policies in most of the Nordic countries. If we take Sweden as an example, the so-called polluter pays principle came already in the 1960s. The precautionary principle, which is sometimes stated to origin from Germany, can be found in Swedish legislation in the end of the 19th century. Finland had the first tax on carbon dioxide in the world, and Sweden followed just a few months after that in 1990-1991. Denmark has been a pioneer country in terms of developing wind power ahead of other countries. So there are numerous national examples showing that Nordic countries over the years have been environmental policy forerunners. Similarly, on the international level, within the European Union and on the global scale, Sweden hosted the first UN conference on the human environment in 1972, nearly half a century ago. And Sweden was pushing for the ratification of Kyoto and had a nice collaboration over the years with South Africa and Brazil for these large UN conferences in Stockholm, Johannesburg, Rio, etc. The World Commission on Environment and Development is also called the Brundtland Commission, which came with its report Our Common Future in 1987. It's also a signal that Norway has been there, and over the years, both in trade talks and climate negotiations, Norway has been a strong progressive voice. Within the European Union, Denmark and Sweden has often been pushing for a more progressive chemicals policy, policies on acidification, etc. And the Baltic Sea has been an area for collaboration long before the Berlin Wall came down, where Sweden and Finland were the engines behind, for instance, the Helsinki Convention. In terms of nature, natural resources, the Nordic countries are rich in hydropower, in waters, in forests. At the same time, there's a very low population density, which might explain some of the nice environmental parameters you see in the comparative analysis. The Nordic countries are also, if we turn to more socioeconomic issues, welfare states with open economies, small countries of progressive nature, characterized often by strong collaboration between employers and employee organizations, strong civil society. The countries are competitive, they have high employment, and in terms of environmental research are international forerunners. This has led to high shares of renewable energy. This has led to a use of pricing mechanisms, implementation of the polluter pays principle, and this has led to decreased emissions over the years. But still, emissions are on levels far higher than those being compatible with the Paris Agreement. And there are problems, I would say, in more or less all Nordic countries in terms of emissions from, in particular, the transport sector. And there is a very problematic erosion of biodiversity in natural landscapes and forests throughout the Nordic countries. So, are Nordic countries forerunners in terms of environmental policy, climate policy still today? Or is the leadership eroding? What is the relation between the national policies and the ever-expanding policies in terms of climate, energy, etc. on the European Union level? All Nordic countries are not even members of the European Union. Is this impacting Nordic collaboration? What can we learn from these experiences during 3, 4, 5 decades from the Nordic countries? And another question we will touch on today is what can Nordic countries learn from other countries? I think that's the frame of today's seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mika. And as I said, Mika will come back and give an end note. I would like to invite the first participant to give her reflections on this, and I'll invite Emma Wiesner up, who's member of the European Parliament and representative of Centre Party in Sweden. So, Emma, what I heard right now from Mika was it was a picture of a few countries that are very progressive in the climate policies and environmental policies. So, what's your take? Can you give? Is this a correct picture? What's the advantages of the Nordic countries, and what are the fallbacks? Can you give you a very short introduction to that?
I've only been a politician for 9 months, but it's always a difficult task to say to a politician to keep short. So only 9 months in, I already have that problem. Anyway, when I think about climate leadership, for me, it's 3 components that is needed for climate leadership. It's unity, and it's ambition, and results. And I would say, well, it's a 3-grade scale, also when it comes to the Nordics from this perspective. Unity, I would say yes. We have a lot of unity in the Nordics between businesses and enterprises, between governments. We have high ambitions. Not necessarily, but we have high unity when it comes to tackling climate change. I would say the Nordic countries and the Nordic parties show a lot of unity. We listened to the climate debate a few weeks ago in Swedish public television, and we see that most of the parties actually have good climate policies. Of course, it's not enough, but all of them show unity when it comes to having momentum in tackling climate change. Then it's results, and then it's ambition, and I would say there we in the Nordics have things to do to improve. I think even the goals are not as ambitious as they have to be in order to reach the Paris Agreement. I think we have a homework to do there. We think we have very high ambitions. I think we should and can go even further, also in the Nordic countries. So there we're steadily going down, and then we have results. And for now, we haven't seen enough results from a Nordic perspective. And if we really want to have leadership, we need all 3 of them. We need to have the ambitious level set. The Nordic countries also need to be Paris Agreement aligned, and we need to show concrete results. Just one example. When it comes to fossil subsidies, Sweden is still one of the top countries in providing fossil subsidies. I mean, we have a huge homework to do there. It's easy to say, oh, but we have unity when it comes to tackling climate change. Yeah, we have unity, but that's not enough. We cannot provide the results. So if we want to show leadership on EU level and then want EU to show leadership on global level, we also need to do our homework and actually be front runners, not just talk about being front runners. Because I think that's a little bit what we're doing today.
So may I just do you think unity is because of the political system and the social setup of Sweden, the Swedish culture and so on, or is it because of environment policies as such being an issue which is unifying?
I think the long tradition of climate policies in the Nordics helps providing this unity. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Okay, I'll come back to some of the things you said, but I'll invite up the next speaker so we can start the conversation with all of us. And I would like Bernd Nordman to come to the stage, who is a representative of World WWF World Fund. Sorry, from Finland. And we talked about unity, and unity is something which is, I guess, a trademark of Finnish policies. And I don't know if you can give your reflection about Finland as a front runner. Is this also a correct picture, or is if there's something that's some challenges that you would like to raise, just as an introductory note?
Yes. Well, I think Finland is, when it comes to ambition, right now one of the front runners. So we are striving towards climate neutrality in 2035. That's the government's position, and hopefully this goal will also be part of the revised climate law being discussed right now. Unfortunately, of course, climate neutrality 2035 is really not enough if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Even the Nordic countries should do more, but I think at the moment it's a really good and ambitious goal. We have to deliver. When it comes to Finland, I think all Nordic countries, I think the consumption-based emissions, that's one of our blind spots. When the Nordic lifestyle, our way of living, is actually causing a lot of emissions outside the Nordic countries. And that's a thing we should really work with. Yeah, I think the Nordic countries, we are on the right path. Emissions are going down, slowly, but still they are going down. And we are trying to decouple our economy. So decoupling economic growth with the hazardous environmental emissions. So I think we're on the track, but we have to do a lot more.
Okay, we'll come back to the issue of consumption and exported emissions. I think that's
adding transport also to that list, consumption-based and transport.
But I mean, 2035 is it's a quite ambitious aim if you compare to other countries worldwide. I mean, what's the main challenges for Finland to reach this right now? Because if you look at the emissions reductions, are not on track.
Yeah, actually, emissions reductions are. We need a little bit more, yeah, but the trajectory is actually quite good. But climate neutrality is about balancing the sinks and the emissions.
Right.
So let's also remember the sinks. We really must do everything we can to make the sinks larger and to preserve the sinks, both in agriculture and in forests. So emissions is very important, and that's the most important thing, but we really must think about the sinks too.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back. I think we open up a couple of issues, but I'll invite Nadia Gullestrup Christensen to come to the stage, who is a Danish youth delegate. And you study environment policies and focusing on energy policies, which is interesting when it comes to Denmark. As Mikael mentioned, that Denmark is a country which is a forerunner of wind energy, and once was a country with a quite large oil industry and gas industry, but still, in that sense, it's an interesting case because you managed to turn this direction around. So. Is this a correct picture to say that Denmark is on track to move into a neutral energy production?
Yeah, so I think it's of course amazing to start with the positive angle, and energy, the energy story in Denmark is absolutely positive, and we actually like to call it the energy adventure in Denmark, which is like, I don't know, we like to be proud of it. But that is truly amazing in Denmark, and Denmark has really been part of actually developing offshore wind. We put up the first offshore wind farm in 1991, which was called Wind City. It was so small and it was so expensive, and it was like not a success at all. But that was like the beginning of this wind adventure. So that is, in many ways positive. And what I really like about it is that it's also a solution that we can export to the rest of the world. Because I believe that when we're talking about Nordic leadership, we shouldn't only focus on how to be sustainable ourselves. We should also think about developing solutions and developing technologies that we can export to other countries in a meaningful way where they actually want to adopt it, because I believe that is true leadership.
Okay, wind was possibly a neutral choice for Denmark, being with quite favorable conditions for that. But was there something in the society, in the political setup, that made that decision easier and more neutral and natural for Denmark to take, or were there like stumble blocks on the path towards?
I think what is really interesting is the collaboration between both the government and companies, because I think that has really been a key thing in this development of offshore wind and wind energy in Denmark as such. But in regards to next step and how to develop wind energy or other renewable energy sources even further, I think we need to expand these partnerships, because we should not only talk about partnerships between corporations and the public sector, which we like to talk about in Denmark. We should talk about partnerships also with young people and civil society and education systems, because we really need everyone to be on board in the renewable energy transition for this to truly succeed. We need young people to believe and see that there would be job opportunities for them, and we need the people already working in the oil industry to see that they can also work on an offshore wind platform instead of an oil platform. So we really need to tell that story for this to be truly successful, and not only sustainably but also socially sustainable.
Okay. Thank you. And when you enter the conversation about young people, I will invite Anton Foley, who is a representative for Friday for the Future in Sweden, and studying political science in at Uppsala University. Just before you start, Sweden is a forerunner on many issues that we presented today. But one thing we didn't mention was that the Friday for the Future movement we Greta Thunberg started in Sweden was can you say there's any specific reason why it started there and not in, say, Germany or America or UK?
Well, the movement didn't start in Sweden. The movement has existed for ages, and it's just that when Greta Thunberg sat down outside the Swedish Parliament building, the media gave the sort of attention to the movement that already existed and was already growing really quickly. And after that, of course, it exploded in a different way, and the Fridays for Future was founded as a name and for the movement. But really the climate movement has existed for way longer and was growing already before that. So it was just a matter of time before the media decided to give a figurehead to the movement.
Right. But this is given Sweden some international credibility on these issues. But is this what will you say? Is this a correct representation of Sweden climate policies? And what would you say? Can you give your views on this?
Well, I'd say that the Nordic countries, and maybe Sweden in particular, really like to see ourselves as climate leaders, and that's sort of in all the rhetoric from our politicians and our government, that Sweden is leading the way in tackling climate change and leading the way in fighting the climate crisis. But you can't be a climate leader when you have some of the highest per capita consumption emissions in the world. You cannot consider yourself a climate movement when your official statistics and the goals that our goals for carbon neutrality only encompass roughly a third of our total emissions, because we decide to ignore consumption-based emissions and biogenic emissions from the burning of biomass and just ignore the majority of our emissions. And it's this sort of clever accounting that allows Sweden to call ourselves climate leaders while actually being some of the most environmentally harmful countries in the world. And this is due to the high consumption lifestyle of Swedes, which is a problem in most of the global north, but Sweden has some of the highest consumption and highest resource use in the world. And the effects of this aren't visible in Sweden because the effects of the climate crisis aren't hitting Sweden the hardest. They're hitting parts of the global south the hardest. And the same applies for the massive amounts of resource use. Most of this is depleting resources in the global south. Once again, we're exporting the problem because our high consumption lifestyle that allows Swedes to be among the sort of happiest people in the world, dark side of that is not visible in Sweden, or most of it isn't visible in Sweden because it's the cost of that lifestyle is paid by poorer and less well-off people, colonized people in the global south.
Interesting. Bernd, you also mentioned this. Finland is, I think, the happiest people in the world, according to some surveys. So, I mean, but how should we tackle that? I mean, is it possible for Nordic leaders to pursue policies that will reduce consumption emissions? I mean, what kind of policies are there? What kind of tools could be used to tackle that, address that issue?
Oh yes, there's a lot of ways. First of all, we need to get the indicators right. Actually, the data that we are referring to here, it's preliminary and it's not very well known, the carbon footprint of our lifestyle. So we need to have a lot more data on it. And then we have economical incentives. We could have more taxes on natural resource use. I could see a lot of different ways. It has to have, you really need to get a good education and get people to understand their footprint. I think travel policy and, for instance, taxes on air traveling is one of the big ones also that are not shown. These emissions are not shown in the national inventories of greenhouse gases.
Right.
So,
but Emma, I mean, when you come to that, you were talking about we're not so much the policies are not that polarized when it comes to climate and environment in Sweden. But I guess this issue, when it comes to consumption and how it should be reduced, if we should introduce more taxes and so on, is more of a contentious issue. I mean, what's your take? And also, I guess some people would say that Scandinavian countries are also exporting. I mean, with exports, we are actually reducing emissions in other countries as well. What's your take on this? Is this a correct picture on how should we address it according to you?
But I see a few blind spots or dark clouds on the Nordic sky, because I of course want to sit here and talk about the success story and the good things about Nordic policies and Nordic perspectives. However, I think we need to do some self-reflection and really do our homework. I think the consumption-based emissions is one of them, where we don't have enough data. It's never been something that we measured. So first you take power of data, then you can take power of your actions. So more data on that. Transport sector, shipping and aviation, not the least, where that's just counted as international emissions, whereas it's a big sector. We have a lot of Swedish and Finnish industries heavily dependent on maritime transport, now completely just burning old traditional fuel oil. So that is something, and that's also what I work day to day on EU level to really have both aviation and maritime in the emission trading system. But those transport-related emissions in general, also one of our blind spots. The fossil fuel subsidies that we still have in the Nordics. We have actually quite a lot of fossil subsidies, both when it comes to aviation and shipping fuels, but also in the emission trading system. It's still open for a lot of subsidies to industries. In free allowances in the emission trading scheme, in energy tax exemptions, carbon tax exemptions, all of that. So that's a very important one. And then I would say the fourth, I mean, now Finland had revised its climate target, but Sweden have not. Sweden's climate targets are not Paris Agreement compatible. So, I mean, it's easy to say we have high ambitions, and we always had, and we have a lot of unity in Sweden and in the Nordics. Yeah, we do, but when it comes to ambition and results, we are lagging behind, to be frank, and a little bit harsh on the Nordics. So I think a lot can be done. One reflection also on what Nadia said when it comes to the energy transition. Before I joined the European Parliament, I'm from industry. I worked as an energy engineer. I did a very interesting study for the Nordic Ministry Council when it comes to renewable energy system and support schemes for renewable energies in the Nordics. And we also haven't cooperated that much when it comes to this area. When it comes to how Denmark have supported wind, how Finland has supported bioenergy, how Sweden have supported hydro. I mean, it differs, and it also varies a lot throughout the Nordics. So I think we can also be more coordinated on a Nordic level, both when it comes to setting the right ambition level, but also concrete actions of implementation. The Nordics can also do more, I think, to really show leadership jointly when it comes to the
that's
transition.
interesting point. So I mean, we move, Nadia, if you move into that area, you can also comment on the consumption issue, but I'd like to ask you a question about on energy. I mean, Denmark is a forerunner here on this, and I guess Sweden and Finland their wind power is being constructed in a quite high speed, but also entering into a lot of problems when it comes to permissions and to local conflicts and so on, which is slowing the construction down. But I guess I don't know if this is a problem in Denmark as well, or if you have found a model which is more successful that we could try to copy and learn from.
I think what is really interesting is that there is not really one model for each country. I think when we talk about the green energy transition, we need to, think beyond borders. We can't just have a renewable energy system in Denmark and then, not care about what is in our neighboring countries. We need to find a way where the wind blows in Denmark, then we can export it to Sweden and to Norway and to Germany and so on to actually be able to have an effect beyond our own countries. And an amazing example of that is Kriegers Flak, which is an offshore wind farm on 400 gigawatt, which was started this year. And this offshore wind farm is actually also importing and exporting renewable energy to Sweden and Germany, which is amazing. And I think we really need to look on how can we develop the grid so that it is easier to export it to other countries, because that is really important in regards to the transition. And then we also need to think about what is beyond energy and how can the energy sector also be part of contributing to other sectors. So now we talked about transport, and I think that it's so amazing if we could collaborate in the Nordic countries in regards to developing power-to-X, hydrogen and other technologies where we can transform our renewable energy sources into fuels for aviation and shipping. And this is really huge task developing new technologies like that, which is also why we need to collaborate beyond just individual countries.
So this sounds like I mean, what's the problem? I mean, it sounds like, or is it just because the technology is not fully developed, or is it because the Nordic countries have not, or is it political a resistance, or what's the problem?
There is multiple problems, just to start, and I just like being positive in the beginning, for the morning. Maybe some of you haven't had coffee yet, but I would love to dive into the problems, and we have already started with that. And in regards to the energy system, we still see a lot of oil, and we still see coal and gas, and for example, coal should totally be banned. We need to phase out fossil fuels now. That is really, so crucial, and it can't be, underlined enough. So that is really something we should do, and we should really extremely accelerate the build-up of renewable energy, because even though it's going faster in the Nordic countries than in other parts of the world, then it's still not fast enough. So that is really something we should ramp up. And now we have talked a lot about consumption, but we haven't really touched upon food and what we eat. And especially in Denmark, we are a pork loving country. It's pork every time and every day. And I think that it is so important to transform what we're eating, and that is something where we're not that good in the Nordic region, and we should really try to look into how can we get a more plant-based diet, and how can we get a more sustainable diet where we're producing more of the food ourselves, while also letting biodiversity thrive.
Oh, there's so many issues. I will let you come back, but Anton, I mean, one of the solutions is to heavily build up renewable energy and in the energy system. What's your take on that? Well, what's the solution? What needs to be done in the short term to get things moving towards carbon neutrality?
Obviously, we need to phase in renewable energy and phase out fossil fuels and biofuels and move to a renewable energy economy and move in more sustainable ways of producing food and materials that we need to build. But that's not going to be enough because we just do not have the time to complete that transition with our consumption and lifestyle at the level it is today. We need to, at the same time, reduce our consumption at the same time as making that technological shift, because we don't have the time and we don't have the technology to be able to complete that shift and stay within our carbon budget for 1.5 degrees over pre-industrial levels. And this cannot be done while continually pursuing the endless economic growth that is pursued by Nordic countries at the moment. And until we abandon that as the sole good and the measure of development, we're never going to be able to face the climate crisis head on. Because if we just pay companies to start producing fossil-free steel, for example, their business model will still be to sell more and more and more, which goes right against what we need to be doing, which is consuming less and less and less. So regardless of how we produce the things we consume, we need to be consuming less of it. And this cannot be done while continually pursuing that endless economic growth. So we need to sort of face reality and realize that what we need to do is decrease our consumption, and that goes hand in hand with abandoning that constant search.
Okay, but so right. I mean, Emma, right now it's in Sweden. There's like so much glorifying of the new fossil-free steel and battery factories and so on. Is this just not more of the same, or is this part of the solution?
I think definitely it's a part of the solution. And going back to the consumption-based emissions, and also what Nadia said in the beginning, I mean, also what we do best is to export technologies and develop technologies, improve research demonstration projects, pilot projects, showing the rest of the world that this technology is possible and it's feasible, because we have the economic growth to be innovators. We have the economic growth to really pursue advanced research that many countries cannot. So here is really, if I was very negative in my previous statement, here is where I want to be a bit more positive, where the Nordics really have an advantage, where we have unity, business sector, industry, private sector, public sector is very determined to do this. We see the fossil-free steel, the battery factories, the new advanced fuels, new aviation fuels developed, fossil-free and carbon-neutral concrete and cement, world's first in its kind, and many also advanced solutions for the energy system, how to balance more renewables. That is being researched and developed in the Nordics, and that is the way of then also exporting that technologies to other countries and to have them. It means it's much easier to take a step into a new technology if you have seen it be done before. Right. Investors want to invest in technology that works, and we can show and have a test zone in the Nordics, show that it works and really export that and contribute with climate benefits to the rest of the world.
Right, so Sweden, so Nordic countries can be test zone, that's and export. What's your take on this, Ben?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on Nadia, and perhaps you also, Chair. I agree that we need more renewables. We need to phase out the fossils. But I just want to remind everybody that also the production of heat and power from renewable sources, it has impact on nature. So we mustn't be too fast. And the regulation, for instance, concerning wind power, it's really good. We need regulation. And we need to put those wind parks in the right places, not in the wrong ones. So we need also patience. And I guess to some extent that's a good thing in the Nordic countries. We think first and then act. And I think it's really important. So we shouldn't create more problems when solving the climate crisis.
Nadia, you want to comment?
Yeah, I totally agree. And Emma, the other Danish youth delegates to the UN, and me, we are hosting another event. Sorry for talking about that now. Also here in the Nordic Pavilion, where we're like talking about how to scale the renewable build out while conserving and preserving biodiversity. We have also invited WWF, so it is going to be amazing. But that is just really to say, of course, we shouldn't tackle one crisis by running directly into multiple others, and that is not limited to biodiversity. That is also resource use, because we really need to find a circular way of, you know, building these beautiful wind turbines, because that is also a problem that we need to acknowledge. So thank you so much for commenting on that. And I think just to add on that, I think technology and developing solutions on that is also really important, because you can do different things where it's actually the fundamentals where they're like, it's maybe possible to make them in a way and construct them in a way where it is having a positive benefit on biodiversity, but it may cost. So we should also, as a society, be willing to cost or to pay for preserving biodiversity. So that is a really interesting dialogue and debate that we should really continue to have. And I hate that we are also like often having debates in silos where either we're talking about climate or we're talking about biodiversity, because we need to find solutions that work for both.
And this is an issue which is very topical when it comes to Sweden and Finland, of course, when it comes to forestry, because that's where it could be a solution for the climate, it could be a part of the climate mitigation policies, but it could also be something that that makes the biodiversity problem even worse. Is Sweden? Do you think Sweden can get onto the right track on the forest policy, or are we worsening the?
Well, Swedish forestry policy is, as a lot of people now are starting to realize, among the absolute worst offenders in the world. And it's so bad that our forestry sector is bigger or has higher emissions than the rest of our entire territorial emissions across all sectors. And yet the Swedish forestry industry pushes sort of massive PR campaigns about how they're tackling the climate crisis and how Swedish forestry and managing the forest is an important role in fighting the climate crisis, which obviously it is. But the Swedish forestry model right now is based on clear-cutting old growth forest that is a massive carbon sink and is continually a really high carbon sink, because old growth forest has one of the highest capacities of storing new carbon every year. When you clear cut that forest, all that carbon is released into the atmosphere and you lose the sink that keeps soaking up carbon year after year after year. Then this wood is taken and 77% of it goes to either short-term products, short-life products such as paper and single-use packaging, or is burned for bioenergy. So that carbon that's stored there goes straight back into the atmosphere. This is not renewable in any kind of sense, because forest is not a renewable resource. Trees can be, but even trees are a renewable resource over 70 years, perhaps. You grow to 70 years and then you burn them and then you go to 70 years ago. We do not have 70 years, even if we were just talking about trees. The industry pushes the idea that we need to harvest our forests and to have an active forestry sector to start building in wood instead of building in steel, which is absolutely true, because that has lower emissions. But the truth is that most of the emissions from the forest, or most of the biomass taken from the forest, is not used for building. It's not used for replacing concrete or steel. It's burned. And that carbon dioxide doesn't matter if it comes from oil, coal, natural gas, or wood, because the carbon dioxide molecule looks the same regardless. That's before even taking into account the massive biodiversity issues with clear-cutting forest. Clear-cuts do not house biodiversity. A monocultural plantation, which is planted after a forest is clear-cut, does not house biodiversity the same way a ancient old-growth forest is. It's not even taking into account the social aspects of clear-cutting indigenous forests and destroying their sort of reindeer herding and their sort of indigenous culture, just to pursue the sort of economic growth that's pursued by these forestry companies. So on all aspects, on climate, on biodiversity, on social sustainability, they're all saying the same thing, that we need to preserve our old forests and to do a close to nature, indigenous-centered type forestry, where we continue with forestry so that we can phase out concrete and steel, but we do so in a way where we don't burn it, we don't chop down old growth forest, and we don't clear cut.
So
only when we follow these three things.
Yeah.
What forest do we cut? How do we cut the forest? And what do we then do with the biomass? Only when all of those three aspects are sustainable can our forestry be actually said to be a climate win. And right now, they're all three as bad as they can be.
Emma, can you, I mean, this is obviously this is a conflict of interest between economic interest, climate interest, and interest of biodiversity. Do you think there's a solution where?
No, I don't see the conflict, and that's also what I wanted to talk about. I mean, in well-managed forests, doesn't have to be a conflict of interest between biodiversity, between climate goals, and also between phasing out fossil fuels in various sectors. It's a very, very small share. Sweden is one of the lowest shares where forests goes to biomass and being burnt. It's 8%, which is very, very low. So I rather see the opportunity of having well-managed forests providing us with solution to phase out the fossil fuels. 73% of Europe's energy is still fossil, and we don't have the time to relax in phasing out all of this. So I rather see forests, of course, being well managed, but being a part of the solution and the Nordic solution, rather than being not used and slowing down climate action. I also see a very big risk that, talking about carbon sinks, that we have an EU framework in place where French and Dutch farming and industries are hiding their emissions behind the growth of the Swedish forests. Because that's the type of framework being discussed right now at an EU level, where the Finnish and Swedish forests should grow, and emissions are not then cut as ambitiously in other sectors, where French farming can hide behind the growing carbon sink of the Swedish forest. I think that's a very dangerous path to go. I think every country needs to do its homework when it comes to decarbonizing and having growth in the carbon sinks.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this issue is super interesting, and we can keep on discussing it for quite some time. We only got 5 minutes left, and we need to wrap up after that. And I'll Bent, I mean, can you give your Finnish perspective on this issue, because it's an issue which is very present in your country?
On the forestry issue? Let's have a 2-week seminar on that one. Yeah, actually, I mean, I think we have quite similar situation as in Sweden. So, and the discussion is similar, and the arguments are similar. So, yeah, let's come back to that.
Okay. So I'll just give you now. We are just ending in 5 minutes. Nadia, would you please? I mean, this is not an issue in Denmark, but with the conflict of interest with energy and other aspects of climate policies, of course, present there as well.
I would also love to comment on forestry in Denmark, because we don't have it almost, and I think that is actually really important to acknowledge. Of course, we do have like a few trees here and there, but it's horrible to see that Denmark is just after Bangladesh, we're the country in the world where there is the most agriculture, and that is also mainly because we are producing so much fodder for our animals, and I think that is a huge problem that we need to address, and then we need to phase out some of the agriculture and then instead have forestry. And I know that we will not be able to have forestry of the same quality as they have in other Norwegian countries, because they have like really old forest, and we would not be able to have that in the same way in Denmark. But I think that is really a place where Denmark is not a leader at all. We're like the bad guy in the class. So I think that is so interesting, and also not that good to be from Denmark when it comes to that.
Okay, so we're doing some things right, but we do still have a lot of challenges, and there's lot of aspects of society that still needs to transform, and in that transformation we will surely have some conflicts. I mean, just Anton, I mean, what you are saying is that there's a lot of things needs to happen now, but do you think, I mean, how do we bring people around this issue? I mean, how can we stimulate climate activism in broader society?
Well, as climate activists, we need to continuously mobilize and organize the people behind this issue, which is really important to a lot of people. And this needs, of course, go in hand with improved climate education, so that people understand what the problems we're facing and what the solutions to them are. But then we also need to together sort of gather around this issue and demand the political change that is necessary, because change doesn't come from politicians at a COP. COP26 will not be a turning point in climate, just like no COP has ever been a turning point in climate, because change doesn't come from politicians at fancy UN meetings. Change comes from the people, and only when the people are united behind an issue like this will we ever see the type of political change that is necessary to tackle this crisis. Yeah, that's the important part.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I think we could continue this conversation for quite some time, and there's so much that hasn't been said. And but I think we are running out of time, aren't we? So, Mikael, can you please come up and just give a short summary of your key takes you noticed?
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's been a very interesting discussion and debate, and I'm not in the position to review everything that has been said now, but just perhaps a couple of comments. But if I try to sort it, there were some of the comments and statements concerned the general level. For instance, the consumption levels were discussed. The growth issue was discussed, as always. I think myself that since GDP is a lousy indicator, so if the steering wheel is loose, you can't go to growth or degrowth. I mean, just forget about growth would be my recommendation. And we also talked about subsidies that exist in all sectors, environmental hazardous subsidies. Then there were a number of specific issues that came up, steel, cork, wind power, and of course biodiversity and forest. And I would say that if you take the biodiversity targets, forestry is clearly a main threat to biodiversity. That's a no-brainer to state that. When it comes to biofuels, though, I mean, to talk about biofuels in singular terms is not functioning, because there is bioenergy that is beneficial from sustainability point of view, from climate point of view, and there is bioenergy that is the opposite as well. So to talk about it as one thing, that's not science-based. And if you take use of residues, for instance, from production of forest products, to use them instead of letting them decay to carbon dioxide at the dump, it's of course resource efficient. I think science is very clear on that. But when it comes to the main question, just to wrap it up, I would say that the jury is obviously out when on this topic of are Nordic countries leaders in relation to the climate crisis. And maybe both views are correct in a way. When it comes to setting new policies, stimulating transformations, thinking about side effects, there are still policies ahead of most other countries. If we take the consumption emission factor, on the other hand, Nordic countries are evidently not forerunners or leaders in any sense, because we are far from the tracks where we need to embark on in order to transform societies within the frames of stringent carbon budgets compatible with the climate, with the Paris Agreement, and also to do that in a fair way, which is an extreme challenge. And I would say also that the jury is still out in this causal effect relationship. Are Nordic countries fostering these policies because they're welfare states, or is the fact that they are pushing for climate and environmental policies contributing to the fact that they are welfare states? Maybe it's both ways around, so it's very difficult to say, point it out in one way or the other. And I think looking at the signals we get from the control room and so on, I think it's time to wrap it up. So I would like, also on behalf of Climate Change Leadership in Uppsala, to thank the panel, and Daniel, also thank you for a nice facilitation of this debate.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Emma, Bernd, Nadia, and Anton. Very interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
A round of applause.